In the end, we have no choice but to rely on Japan. That's probably it. But the problem is how to ask. How to ask. It seems that the South Korean side is putting forward conditions again, even though they are the ones receiving the conditions. Hello. There are no items to consider. It's just one word, but there are no more powerful words. Don't yell, don't blame. Just keep quiet and distance yourself. The scariest thing about Japan-South Korea relations right now is not Japan's anger, but the silence that has been judged to be no longer worth explaining. Please watch until the end to find out what happened. Japan's true feelings as told by an empty desk from the beginning. My name is Minji Sho, and I am an economist and reporter in Seoul. In the past, whenever I wrote an article about Japan-South Korea relations, the words conflict, friction, and anger would always appear somewhere. The South Korean side would criticize Japan. The Japanese side would protest. Experts would appear on TV and make a fuss about historical issues, diplomatic issues, and economic cooperation. That was the usual scene in Japan-South Korea relations. But recently, what scared me the most was that Japan had stopped getting angry. It didn't get angry, it didn't fight back, and it didn't make a big deal out of it. It just quietly got up from its seat. That day, we received information that a South Korean delegation had visited Tokyo. The official purpose was to exchange opinions on financial cooperation. But among us reporters, almost everyone knew. It was probably a currency swap. The tariffs wouldn't stop. The cost of raising foreign currency would rise. South Korean companies were nervous about repaying their debts. Anxiety about the South Korean economy was gradually spreading in the market. The South Korean government first asked the United States for help, but they didn't get the response they had hoped for. The United States is not a cold country. It's just a country that won't take action unless it's in its best interests. No matter how much South Korea emphasizes its alliance, in the world of finance, what counts is trust, not emotion. And the last remaining partner was Japan. Sombi sighed as he looked at the editorial monitor. In the end, we had no choice but to rely on Japan. That's probably it. But the problem was how to ask. How to ask. It seems that the South Korean side is putting forward conditions again, even though they're the ones receiving the help. I put the documents on the desk. They listed the items that the South Korean side is said to be trying to present to Japan. The size of the funds, non-interference in how they are used, restrictions on information disclosure, new responses to historical issues, and consideration for public opinion in South Korea. To be honest, I got a headache the moment I read it. This is not the attitude of the borrower. It's as if they assume that Japan wants to help South Korea. Yes, that was the strangest part. The South Korean side still had this idea somewhere. Japan would ultimately help South Korea. Japan can't abandon South Korea. If Japan-South Korea relations break down, Japan will be in trouble too. So in the end, they compromise. But the reaction leaking out of Tokyo was completely different. There are no items to consider. The Japanese counselor is said to have said just that. There was no collusion. There was no lecture. There was no sarcasm. They just calmly and matter-of-factly ended the discussion there. The moment I saw that 1 minute, my spine tingled. From the South Korean side, rejection itself may have been expected. In negotiations, you take a tough stance at the beginning. Then you extract information from there. That's what I thought was diplomacy. But the Japanese reaction wasn't rejection. It was much colder. This isn't even negotiation. What does that mean? Maybe Japan no longer sees South Korea as a negotiating partner. The Japanese desk in the conference room. There are few documents there, and no expression on their faces. The air is quiet, and no one raises their voices. But that very quietness was the answer. Japan doesn't hate South Korea. It doesn't want to bash South Korea. It just doesn't choose them, and doesn't get involved. If it doesn't suit the country's national interests at the time, it quietly draws the line. That's what Japan is like now. In the past, if South Korea used strong words against Japan, it would get domestic support. The comfort women issue, the strict school issue, the Fukushima seafood issue. Whenever something happened, they criticized Japan and used it as a tool to unite domestic public opinion. But during that time, Japan was proud but secretly looking for ways to maintain relations. But now it's different. The Akaichi administration places the words, protecting Japan's national interests, at the center of its policy decisions, not as a mere slogan. It's not about whether to help or not, but whether helping is rational for Japan and worth using the tax money and trust of the Japanese people. They're calmly looking at that. Japan isn't pushing away out of emotion. It's keeping its distance out of calculation. That's scarier than being angry. Yes, anger is still looking at the other person, but silence means you're no longer looking. That day I wrote the headline of the article as follows. Even though Japan's unbridled rejection of South Korea's support is a new stage, I really wanted to use harsher words. Japan no longer needs South Korea. 2. Why is Japan's support in the national interest? There was widespread surprise in South Korea at Japan's reaction. On TV debate programs, former diplomats and economic commentators lined up to express their dissatisfaction. Japan should respond responsibly as a neighboring country. If the South Korean economy becomes unstable, it will affect Japan as well. Has Japan forgotten the spirit of cooperation between Japan and South Korea? But I felt something was off when I heard those words. Cooperation is not a word that is only used when it is convenient. Normally, South Korea repeatedly criticizes Japan. When they are in trouble in domestic politics, they bring up historical issues. Even if they make promises, they bring them up again when the government changes. They put pressure on Japan through import restrictions and non-sale campaigns. And yet, when financial institutions approach, they say, "We are neighbors, so help us." If they had thought about it for a moment, they should have realized how Japan would view this. For Japan, currency swaps are not just a token of friendship. It is a system that supports the financial stability of the other country. And it is also an act of providing Japan's credit and funds to the outside world. In other words, it cannot be established unless the other party is trustworthy. Moreover, the South Korean side did not simply ask for support. They wanted the scale of the funds to be large. They wanted no interference in how the funds were used. They wanted information disclosure to be limited. They wanted Japan to be considerate of historical issues. They even attached such conditions. I called my fellow South Korean reporter Hatai, who covers the Ministry of Finance. What do the Japanese side think? They are quite sober. Katayama, it seems that the South Korean side wanted to break through by contacting the Ministry of Finance, but Japan is not going along with it at all. As expected. Moreover, the people around Master Takaichi are quite cautious this time. They do not think that helping will be effective for Japan and South Korea. It is not in the national interest. Yes, quite the opposite. In those words, I could see a little of the logic on the Japanese side. If Japan helps South Korea, the South Korean market may calm down temporarily. The national security situation will also ease a little. The South Korean government can announce that it has secured cooperation with Japan. It can also be shown to domestic public opinion as an achievement. But what happens after that? Is there any guarantee that South Korea will keep its promises? Will it stop criticizing Japan? Will it not rehash historical issues? Will it change its stance of looking nice to China while only asking Japan for financial support? No one knows the answer. Or perhaps Japan already knows. Japan has prioritized the stability of Japan-South Korea relations many times in the past. The claims issue was settled in the Japan-South Korea Treaty. An agreement was also reached on the comfort women issue. Even so, the issue has been brought up again and again in South Korea due to changes in government and public opinion. From Japan's perspective, this is not just diplomatic friction. It is the risk of dealing with a country whose promises are not assets. They see it as a sign that if they help once, they will do it again. That's right. Japan is trying to reduce future risks by not helping South Korea this time. It is in the national interest not to help. I took note of those words. It is in the national interest not to help. It sounds cold, but it is a natural way of thinking when it comes to running a country. The stance of protecting Japan's national interests advocated by Prime Minister Goi is not an emotional anti-government stance, but rather a way of thinking that separates support from risk. It does not allow the assets, credit, and diplomatic cards of the Japanese people to be used for the convenience of the other country. We will not give additional trust to a party that treats international agreements lightly. This is the policy direction. In South Korea, there were voices calling Japanese politicians and bureaucrats wicked. But from Japan's perspective, it is rather the opposite. Why should we help a party that has repeatedly broken promises? Why should we prioritize the stability of the South Korean economy over the interests of the Japanese people? Why do we think that the party seeking support can impose conditions? South Korea has not been able to answer these questions. Murami said this while reading my article. Japan used to explain more, didn't it? Yes, but now they don't explain. Does that mean they have given up? They probably decided that explaining wouldn't change anything. Japan is not what is happening to South Korea. They have stopped expecting. That's why they don't get angry. And this is the harshest. If they were angry, there is still room for repair, because they still want the other party to understand. But silence is different. Silence means that they have decided that there is no need to persuade the other party anymore. Japan has seen that the risks it will bear by supporting South Korea are greater than the benefits it will gain by supporting South Korea. That is why it feels raw. Even when South Korea is in trouble, they don't take action immediately. It is not coldness, but a calculation of national interests. I type the next minute into the screen. Japanese politicians and bureaucrats make security decisions based on years of experience, not emotion. The moment I wrote that minute, I felt a little pain. Because it meant that South Korea had reached the point where Japan would judge it that way. A country with $3 and a country looking for dollars. In the world of finance, no matter how loud you shout, it doesn't matter. What's needed is trust and dollars. When the South Korean economy really starts to struggle, it won't be the economy itself that matters. It's how stably it can procure dollars. Import payments, energy bills, companies, foreign currency denominated debt, trust in overseas investors, all ultimately come down to dollars. That's why the South Korean government asked for a currency swap with the United States. But the United States won't easily grant South Korea special security. What's important to the United States is the stability of the country's financial system and its strategic interests. It's not enough to say that South Korea is an ally. Japan, on the other hand, is different. The Bank of Japan is part of the U.S. Federal Reserve and a limited pool of dollar liquidity. It's one of a limited number of central banks that use it, along with Canada, the UK, the European Central Bank, and the Swiss National Bank. This isn't just a matter of institutions. It means that Japan is trusted by the world's financial markets. Japan is not a country looking for dollars. It is a country that has access to dollars. I said this while looking at the documents. Japan has routes to obtain dollars. It has a certain amount of foreign exchange reserves. It also has deep international markets. The yen is an internationally used currency, and Japan's financial system is connected to the core of the world. Furthermore, Japan has played a central role in the CPTP. Even after the US withdrew, it was Japan that kept the free trade framework together. South Korea wanted to join that circle. But here again, the issue is trust. Will they abide by the rules? Will they not bend their promises in response to domestic public opinion? Will they try to curry favor with both China and Japan while only taking convenient profits? Japan is watching this. A villager brought coffee and placed it on my desk. Is Japan really that strong? It's not flashy, but it's strong. In South Korea, Japan is said to be a fallen country. But that's the most dangerous misunderstanding. Japan doesn't raise its voice, so it appears weak. Japan doesn't argue emotionally, so it appears to back down when pushed. Japan doesn't immediately call for sanctions, so it seems like they're not serious. But in reality, Japan has been increasing its options over the years. It's reducing its dependence on South Korea by reviewing its supply chain and expanding its sources of procurement for critical materials. Its companies are avoiding heavy reliance on the South Korean market. In terms of diplomacy, it's strengthening its relationships with the US, Australia, India, ASEAN, and Europe. In other words, Japan has created a structure that can function even without South Korea. On the other hand, South Korea still thought it could rely on Japan. Japanese materials, Japanese equipment, Japanese markets, Japanese financial credit, and even Japanese support in times of crisis are starting to crumble. South Korea thought it could use Japan's credit while criticizing Japan. That's too convenient, isn't it? Oh, but no one at home is saying that out loud. Even support for the Ian government in South Korea has begun to waver. When the economy declines, the people look at their lives more than the words of diplomacy. Prices, employment, housing, corporate performance, and pensions are in doubt. And no matter how much applause they get for criticizing Japan, the economic downturn doesn't stop. The market is not driven by patriotism. Furthermore, South Korea has been nice to China. When criticizing Japan, it leans toward Chinese public opinion, emphasizes its alliance with the US, and asks Japan for financial support. But an indecisive attitude is the weakest in times of crisis. From China's perspective, South Korea cannot be completely trusted. From America's perspective, South Korea appears to be a wavering ally. From Japan's perspective, South Korea appears to be a neighboring country that may or may not keep its promises. No one will seriously try to help if this is the case. I suddenly remembered a certain saying. What is scarier than rejection is being judged as not worth explaining. This is exactly what the current Japan-South Korea relationship is like. Japan does not yell at South Korea, but it does not sit down at the table. It does not discuss. It does not ask for conditions. It does not even consider. This is not because South Korea's demands are unpleasant. It is because they are a low priority from the start in light of Japan's national interests. For the Takaichi administration, supporting South Korea is not a symbol of effectiveness but a risky proposition. And if it is a risky proposition, it naturally examines the conditions. It demands disclosure of information. It checks how the funds are being used. It checks past promises and the fulfillment of past promises. If South Korea refuses to do this, the matter is over. What is Japan protecting by not helping South Korea? The trust of the Japanese people. Trust, financial trust, diplomatic trust, and international trust that Japan has built up. It is not safe to rely on someone who is not sure whether or not they will keep their promises. The villagers remained silent. I remained silent too. The city of Seoul, visible from the editor's window, was bustling as usual. But beneath the lights, I felt as if something big was quietly sinking in. It would be too late to act after the South Korean plane arrived. In reality, they should have built up trust before then. But South Korea criticized Japan until a crisis struck. And when it did, they tried to rely on Japan. And Japan quietly replied. There was nothing to consider. That one word was not a refusal to engage in financial negotiations. It was Japan's final assessment of the long-standing Japan-South Korea relationship. What Japan presented was not an angry rejection, but a quiet selection. It was not a question of whether to help or not, but but who to use Japan's trust for. The criteria for making that judgment have changed from the old Japan-South Korea relationship. Japan has changed to a diplomatic system of forced elections. I stared at the monitor for a while after that. The old Japan-South Korea relationship was much more emotional. South Korea would resist, and Japan would rise. Then the United States would intervene. In the end, improving relations was important, and they would come to an agreement. It was a constant cycle. But now Japan is starting to accept that trend. The era of shuttle diplomacy may be coming to an end. Japan is now starting to abandon the idea of maintaining equal distance with everyone. In other words, it is a selective diplomacy. It prioritizes countries that abide by international agreements, countries with which it can cooperate on security, countries with which it can share economic rules, and countries that it can trust in the long term, and concentrates its diplomatic resources there. Conversely, it keeps its distance from countries that repeatedly cause problems. It may sound cold, but it is rational as a nation. Japan is currently expanding its cooperation with India, Australia, ASEAN, and the Middle East, while focusing on its relationship with the United States. In particular, when President Trump recently mentioned monetary cooperation with the UAE in the Middle East, there was not much of a stir in Japan. However, it attracted considerable attention from financial professionals. Japan is increasing its options other than South Korea. Energy, logistics, investment, finance. It is all about diversifying risks. Japan does not view South Korea as an enemy. It is simply removing it from its list of dependent countries. That was important. In South Korea, there was a lot of emotional talk about Japan being a cold neighbor. But from Japan's perspective, it is the opposite. Why do we need to continue to depend on a country that repeatedly causes problems? Why do we need to provide financial credit to a country that repeatedly ignores and denies historical issues in its domestic politics? That was the logic of the Japanese side at the moment. The Fukushima fisheries issue in particular was quite controversial in Japan. Domestic politics took precedence over scientific safety, and public opinion over international rules. That's how it appeared to the Japanese side. Then there's the issue of forced labor. The same goes for the Comfort Women Agreement, which the South Korean judiciary effectively overturned Japan's position that the issue had been resolved by the 1965 Japan-South Korea Basic Treaty. It was confirmed to be final and infallible, but it's brought up again when the government changes. The atmosphere in Japan has been changing for quite some time now. Here we go again. Let's just keep our distance. That's how they feel. But South Korea thinks that Japan will be the one to provide the information in the end. That's how it used to be. But it's different now. Japan now even looks at what happens as a result of providing the information. That's a big part of it. Japan has begun to prioritize long-term risk management over short-term improvements in relations. The national interest emphasized by the first-term Takashi administration is not just a forceful stance. It's the idea that Japan won't sell off its credibility, taxes, diplomatic cards, and all of its safety. That's why we're helping South Korea, because it's in trouble. Let's first look at what Japan will lose by helping. Japan has begun to choose virtue over emotion. Does that mean we can't go back to the old Japan-Korea relationship? I was silent for a moment. Then I answered quietly. Japan probably has no intention of going back. 5. South Korea cornered into silence. The atmosphere in South Korea was gradually changing. At first, everyone was bullish. Japan is in trouble too. In the end, they help. The economy is totally dependent. They said so on TV. But the market is honest. The dollar is falling. Foreign currencies are becoming cautious. Companies are rushing to secure dollars. Even individual investors are fleeing to overseas assets. And the scariest thing of all was that Japan didn't understand. The Japanese market isn't panicking at all. It's top news every day in South Korea, but it's only getting a small amount of attention in Japan. What does this mean? In other words, Japan has already factored in the South Korean risk. Companies, financial institutions, and the government have been reducing their dependence on South Korea for years. So Japan isn't as shaken as South Korea thinks. On the contrary, only South Korea is getting anxious. The approval rating of the Lee administration is starting to fall. At first, the papal diplomacy was directed to criticize Japan, approach China, and suppress the balanced diplomacy of the economy. But when the economy worsens, people see the reality. You can't live on supermarket prices, gasoline loans, employment, and patriotism. One day, I couldn't help but feel distressed when I saw a press conference by a South Korean ruling party lawmaker. Japan should respond with a forward-looking approach. Future thinking is a convenient phrase, but from Japan's perspective, it means that they haven't even kept their past promises. Japan no longer moves with words alone. All they look at is fulfillment. South Korea is trying to please both China and Japan. Yes, but that's the most dangerous thing in times of crisis. They seem to be leaning toward China, but they won't completely side with China. They want to maintain their alliance with the United States. They want economic cooperation with Japan. They want everything. But that half-hearted position may work in military affairs, but it's weak in times of crisis. China prioritizes the time and the country. America prioritizes the time. Japan prioritizes national interests. In other words, everyone is looking at their own country now. but South Korea is the only one that hasn't completely shaken off the feeling that it will be helped like it used to be. Maybe South Korea thinks that Japan is the one who is causing the problem, isn't it? No, Japan is awake. Anger is an emotion, but waking up is much more serious. They explain to those who are angry. They criticize. They argue, but they don't even explain to those who have lost interest. There is nothing to consider. That one word symbolized it. It's not rejection. It's the end of interest. That's what Japan, which has cornered South Korea the most, is trying to protect in the end. I kept thinking as I walked around Seoul at night, why is Japan so quiet? In the past, Japan would have been more careful, to prevent Japan-South Korea relations from getting worse, to avoid angering America, and to avoid any impact on the economy. But now it's different. They quietly draw the line. They don't get involved more than necessary. It's not because they hate South Korea. It's because Japan has finally begun to face the risks to its own country. Japan has chosen to protect itself over helping South Korea. Those words just came out of my mouth naturally. Japan is in a very unique position in the world right now. It has a strong alliance with the United States, a huge surgical reserve, credibility in the international financial markets, a stable legal system for energy procurement, and above all, a brand as a promise keeper. None of that was built in a day. It's a trust that's been built up over decades. The Takaichi administration won't use that trust lightly. If helping South Korea increases Japan's risks, it will be cautious. That's only natural. The atmosphere in Japan has been changing for quite some time now. Rather than asking why Japan should help South Korea, there are now more voices asking why Japan should bear the burden. Moreover, while South Korea asks Japan for support, it also considers China. It continues to deal with historical issues. It also doesn't stop criticizing Japan domestically. So please trust me. Trust isn't about being friendly only when you're in trouble, you know. I looked up at the sky. The neon lights on the Seoul are bright today. But behind that light, South Korea was quietly being cornered. It wasn't that Japan yelled at it. It wasn't that they sanctioned it. It was just that it was removed from the priority list. But in the international community, that's the most important thing. Japan will continue to deal with South Korea. Since they're neighbors, they can't cut ties completely. But it will be less supportive from above like it used to be. Instead, Japan will choose based on its national interests. It will look at whether they're worth helping, whether they can trust them, and whether they can keep their promises. And now South Korea is starting to fail that test. I've started writing my final article. Japan didn't hate Korea. Japan switched to protecting its own credibility. The moment I wrote that 1 minute, my heart felt strangely heavy. Maybe I've finally realized. It's not just money that Korea is starting to lose. When you lose credibility, the world quietly drifts away. They're starting to lose that reality itself. Various opinions have been expressed by people overseas on this topic, so I'd like to share some of them. Japan is scary because it doesn't act on emotion. It feels more like the end when they say they won't consider it than when they get angry. Did Korea think that they would be saved in the end while criticizing Japan? If that were the case, they wouldn't gain the world's trust. In the end, Japan's response was not cold, but rather the result of trust being the standard. It's typical of Japan these days to look at whether or not a promise is kept, rather than emotions. What did you think? The most impressive thing about Japan-Korea relations this time is that Japan hasn't acted. It doesn't respond with strong words like it used to, nor does it engage in emotional conflict. It's just quietly judging whether or not it meets its national interests. The words that the Takaichi administration keeps repeating about protecting Japan's national interests aren't just a pontifical stance. Japan has begun to be strict in choosing where to spend the financial credibility, diplomatic trust, and security stability it has built up over the years. In particular, additional financial support cannot be achieved on friendship alone. It is being watched to see whether the other country will keep its promises, whether it can share the same rules, and whether it can be trusted in times of crisis. And now, rather than hating South Korea, it appears that Japan has lowered its priority. While anger is still being felt towards the other country, attention has been drawn to the point where it has decided that there is no need to explain anything. That is why the truly scary thing about this topic is not rejection. It could be that South Korea will be quietly distanced as a country that has failed to build up trust in the world. That may be the most serious problem for the South Korean economy and diplomacy. Please let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. We have some surprising news about the South Korean economy. The first article was shocking, but I was also a little surprised when I read it. We will continue to deliver on the serious issues facing South Korea today. There is no hope for young people in South Korea. They are told to work hard, but their efforts are not rewarded. I don't even know what the right answer is anymore. Hello, this is May. Korea, a half-day country. Korea used to claim to have surpassed Japan, but now Korea has a big problem. It's homeless young people. The economic situation in Korea has affected the homeless problem in Korea, which has become a big issue. Will Korea ever be able to overcome this problem? This time, we spoke to a homeless man in Korea. Why on earth is he homeless? Please watch until the end. My name is John. I'm Korean. I'm living a very sad life right now. Because I'm currently living in a booth at an internet cafe. The lighting is dim, and the only sound is the faint sound of typing on a keyboard. I laid out my sleeping bag in that small space and ended another day. I've been living like this for over half a year now. At first, it was just a joke. I was just going to stay here to save a little money. But before I knew it, this had become my home. I couldn't afford to rent a room. Even a one-room apartment costs 500,000 yen a month. The security deposit is not insignificant. I don't have that kind of money anywhere else. So this is where I belong. When I opened the booth curtain a little, I saw a man sitting in the seat next to me. He's thin and his hair is a little too long. I know he sleeps here every night. Hey John, I had work today too. No, I called the dispatch company and they said they didn't have enough workers today. I went to the distribution center this morning. I was paid 8,700 per hour. It was freezing cold, but they made me work in short sleeves. Man, that's hell. The people who gather at internet cafes are all similar. Some are in their early 20s, some are in their 30s. It doesn't matter if you're a high school graduate or a college graduate. In Korea these days, your gender is more important than your academic background. I used to be an ordinary office worker. I had a fairly stable workplace with my colleagues and I was proud of myself in front of my parents. But the company started to go bankrupt when the contract with Japan was terminated. Japanese companies withdrew and all related business partners disappeared. My boss said it couldn't be helped, but if it's just let go, what will happen to our lives? And when I realized it, my job was gone too. Hey, love. How long will I have to keep living like this? Yeah. I don't know either. But it's better than going home. Do I have a home? Yes, I do. But even if I go home, I don't have a place to go, and my parents will just tell me, why aren't you working yet? I see. I don't have a home to go back to anymore. My father passed away 3 years ago. My mother makes ends meet by working as a cleaner. There's no way I can rely on her. In fact, I wanted to send her some money. I haven't even contacted her now. I feel pathetic. I look at my smartphone while hugging my knees on my sleeping bag. I open the job application and press the refresh button. All the same job listings come up. Cleaning, sorting, delivery. The hourly wage is low and they fill up quickly. I suddenly get scared. Is this going to last forever? It's still okay when I'm young. I can move and work. But what happens when I'm over 30? If I can't even afford to pay for a job at an internet cafe, will I have to go to the subway or the streets? Just thinking about it makes my stomach hurt. Have you thought about the future? I don't want to think about it. I don't have the time to think about it. That's right. The future is too far away for us who are struggling to survive in the present. All we can do is look for work. For tomorrow, not today. I don't know if that's hope, but I have to take action. One night, I was watching the news in the break room of an internet cafe. The headlines on my smartphone screen read, Japanese products, no sell movement, intention to continue. I wondered if they were still doing that. The first restrictions on Japan began in 2019. Japan revived import controls on hydrogen and other products, but South Korea reacted fiercely. On TV, everyone was shouting in unison, retaliation, don't forget the colonial era. At that time, everyone suddenly started boycotting Uniqlo. Some people even demonstrated in front of Asahi beer and Lawson stores. I also followed the trend and thought of Japan as the enemy. But you know, I didn't know that at the time. My company did business with a Japanese parts manufacturer. We purchased high-quality parts cheaply and used them to make products. Due to Japanese export controls, we couldn't get them, and the factory's line stopped. We had no choice but to switch to parts from China and other countries, but the quality couldn't keep up. So we kept getting complaints. We trusted the payment, and the contract was terminated. It was the beginning of the end. Was the anti-sale movement really worth it? I started thinking this way after my company went bankrupt and I lost my job. The TV kept telling us to bash Japan and protect the country, but I wonder who was actually being protected. Ji-hoo said quietly while playing with his smartphone next to me. John, bashing Japan didn't improve our lives at all. That's right. In fact, it got worse. I thought, give us jobs before you go bankrupt at Uniqlo. Seriously, what was Moon Jae-in doing back then? He raised the minimum wage, cracked down on companies, and then bashes Japan, which increased his approval rating. It's like he was directing the public's anger outward. Yeah. But we were left with nothing. News footage from that time kept coming back to me. Ruling party lawmakers were shouting, "No Japan," in the National Assembly, and social media was flooded with comments saying they had defeated Japan. But we had lost. We lost our jobs, we lost our homes, and now we're sleeping in an internet cafe. What did we win? Who did we win? There's no way we can laugh about winning over Japan in a situation like this. I began to think. If only we had been able to have a calm dialogue instead of letting our emotions get the better of us and blaming Japan. If only the government had focused on the employment and livelihoods of its citizens. John, why are Koreans so fixated on Japan? It's education. They've been taught since elementary school that Japan is evil. But I don't think young people these days actually hate Japan that much. They like anime and fashion, but if they were to speak out publicly, they'd get criticized. I guess the whole country needs an enemy. In reality, there are no enemies. I couldn't say anything in response to Fu's words. He was probably much calmer. A government can't last without creating enemies. Has this country become like that? If you turn on the TV, you'll still see commentators shouting that Japan should not be forgiven. But there must be sponsors and political motives behind them. And that incitement has led us astray. No one complains about this structure. If they do, they'll be criticized for being pro-Japan. But in reality, it's too late to question things like that now. It'll be too late once we've lost our food and homes. That's true. But it's better than never realizing. It's ironic. They say the truth can only be seen at the bottom. Maybe I'm seeing the true face of Korea from this place. The world opens up again today. I'll live the same reality tomorrow, wrapped in a thin blanket. The number of part-time job openings has been decreasing. In the past, if I looked, I could find something. Convenience stores, restaurants, logistics warehouses, event security, but now, dozens of people apply for a single job. And it says things like, only young and energetic people allowed. I'm still in my 20s, but I'm not young anymore. I've been getting fired quickly at part-time jobs. The minimum wage has gone up, so the stores can't afford to hire more people. It's cheaper to hire new people for a short period of time and then throw them away than to hire them for a long period of time. The part-time job I finally got at a yakiniku restaurant 2 weeks ago ended after just 3 days. The reason was that there weren't many customers, so they were reducing the number of shifts. I was essentially fired. Don't mess with me, I muttered as I returned to my booth alone. I could hear someone sighing through the thin partition of the wall. I opened my smartphone and restarted the job application. Only the same job listings came up again. One day temporary work, night shift, day labor. I got a message from myself. I'm not going to the factory today. The hourly wage is 8,500, but they say I'll get food. I'll go. Tell me the time and place. I have no hope. I'm just working to survive. 6 a.m. A group of young people like me gathered in front of a warehouse on the outskirts of Seoul. They all lined up with exhausted faces and didn't even say hello. Then I'll take the call. When your number is called, go in. I was given a number tag and given a simple explanation of the work. Today I was packing drinking water. All I did was pack plastic bottles and put them in cardboard boxes. It was a simple, boring job that made my back hurt. But I couldn't complain. 8,500 an hour, 8 hours, no lunch. That was my only saving grace. While I was working, the man working silently next to me spoke to me. Yeah, today was my first day. I've been doing this for 3 years now. All I do is day labor. I can't afford set meals. I graduated from college for 3 years, but it was all for nothing. Everywhere only hires people with experience, and I keep getting rejected in interviews. I finally understand this. I'm the same way. Young people in Korea have no hope. They tell me to work hard, but my efforts don't pay off. I don't know what the right answer is anymore. Sihan told me little stories as we worked. About getting rejected by dozens of companies during his job search, the hell of revising his resume, and the reality is that the minimum wage is so high that there are fewer part-time jobs and I have no choice but to continue working day labor. I thought the minimum wage was on the side of workers. But in reality, it's us who are putting our necks in the sand. Companies can't bear the labor costs and have to cut back on hiring. Plus, it's easier to fire part-time workers than full-time employees. I've experienced that many times. When Moon Jae-in was in power, they usually raised wages all at once. Since then, there have been fewer part-time jobs. I was working part-time at the time, but instead of getting a raise, I was fired. Even if it's a well-intentioned production, it's meaningless if reality doesn't catch up. By the time I finished working, my whole body was aching. Still, I received a little over 80,000 yen in compensation and got on the subway home. I sat in my seat and stared out the window. Office workers in suits were checking stock prices on their smartphones. They seemed like people from a completely different world from me. I wonder when they became so distant. Until a few years ago, I was also wearing a suit and swaying on the train. But, with just a slight misalignment, I'm here now. The gap was instantaneous. When I returned to the internet cafe at night, Ji-hoo was already wrapped up in his sleeping bag. I didn't say anything today. My back is at its limit. I think I've probably sprained my leg. Seriously, go to the hospital. I don't have any money and my insurance has expired. I see. There was silence for a while. I could hear the sound of someone eating instant ramen outside the booth. It makes me think that being young alone isn't enough to survive. Yeah, there's no value in youth. All I'm saying is to work while your body can still move. But what happens when it stops moving? It was scary words. But that's the reality. We live in an age where even part-time work is considered a luxury. I can't work even if I want to. Even if I do, I have no means of survival. But morning comes. I'll look for work again tomorrow. To survive. When I returned to the cafe to sleep, I saw the same faces. A row of private rooms separated by curtains at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Each room had its own occupant. They were people who had lost their homes just like me. One night, a conversation naturally began in the break room. As usual, we were complaining about work while eating cup ramen. Today I was working as a traffic controller. I'd been standing since 7 a.m. My legs were shaking. How much would I make per day? 60,000 yen, no transportation expenses. I was told to bring my own lunch. That's pretty much volunteer work. Well, yeah, but I had no other work to do. There were 56 men there. All of them were young men in their 20s and 30s. But they weren't your average young men. They weren't the kind of guys who hung out at cafes, went on dates with their girlfriends, and posted photos on social media. They were people looking for work, worried about where they were going to sleep, and counting on the morning's threats. Have you ever been to the subway? Seoul Station? Yes. There are a lot more people sleeping there at night. It's not that the age group is older, it's mostly young people. If you can't pay your rent, you'll have no choice but to go there. But won't the security guards kick you out of the subway? It seems like they have an unspoken rule until morning. If you move at 1 a.m., they won't complain. The term invisible homeless is a bit too real. It's true that you don't see many people sleeping on cardboard boxes in the city. But that's not because they don't exist. They're just in places you can't see. Internet cafes, subways, 24-hour fast food restaurants, park toilets. There are a lot of houses in Seoul that aren't homes. I went to the city hall before and told them I had nowhere to live. They told me they couldn't
support me because I wasn't registered as a resident. Isn't that funny? Seriously? Only people who are in the system can receive government support. That's the reality. I hear things like that are tough too. There is support housing, but the conditions are different, and the elderly are in trouble too. My mother is almost 70, but she still works. Cleaning, huh? Yeah. Night shift cleaning buildings. She's in terrible shape, but she only makes a little over 700,000 yen a month. Of course she can't rely on her parents. This conversation reaffirmed to me that I can't rely on anyone. My father died early, and my mother still works. There's no way they could live on their pension alone. Far from relying on her, she didn't even tell me that she was here because she didn't want to worry her. She couldn't tell me that she'd be okay because she had family. In Korea, there's still this illusion that family will take care of everything. But that's the logic of people who don't see reality. For people like us who have no home, no money, and no future, none of that matters. That night, I talked for a long time, which was unusual for me. The lighting in the internet cafe felt a little warmer, probably because I had someone to talk to. I felt like I was able to share a little bit of my loneliness. Hey, John. What am I living for? To eat tomorrow. Is that all? For now, that's all I have, but I hope that someday I'll find a reason beyond that. I hope that someday will come. Everyone has given up somewhere. But they haven't completely given up. That's our reality now. No one pays any attention to them, and they don't make the news, but there are certainly young people who have fallen through the cracks of society living here. On such a night, someone shared a cup of instant ramen with me. That was the warmest thing about that day. When I woke up, the ceiling of the booth was creaking vaguely as usual. My sleep was shallow, and my body felt heavy. My neck and back hurt from curling up in my sleeping bag. But I opened my eyes and was still alive today. There were no notifications on my smartphone. There was no change on the job application. I don't know how many times this has happened. The same morning begins again. I guess I'll have to start looking for a job from scratch again today. I buy a cheap can of decaf coffee from a vending machine and sip it while opening the job site. I apply to several jobs, relying only on the tags, no experience required, or day labor okay. But I don't get any replies. I'm used to it now. Are you awake? Today too? Yeah, looking for a job. I skipped work yesterday because my back was bad, so I'm out of money. I'm also barely making it. If I can't go today, I'm done for. I can only laugh about it, but I can't. Living on such a tight budget. I suddenly remembered my mother. I really want to call her, but I can't tell her how I'm feeling right now. I'm not in a state where I can tell her that I'm okay. It must be so hard not being able to rely on your parents. And yet, my mother cleans the building every day. She can't live on her pension alone, so she lives in an old apartment and gets by on a budget. I should be the one helping her, but instead I can't do anything. In fact, I can't even manage to feed myself. This country is cold to the poor, whether they're young or old. That day, the Moon Jae-in administration said it would raise the minimum wage and eliminate inequality. But what actually disappeared was the opportunity to work. They said the country would change, but what changed was the collapse of my life. Even at this very moment, we are being left to our own devices in the name of personal responsibility. John, what are you going to do in the future? I don't have time to think about the future. But what will happen if things continue like this? I won't be able to even stay at an internet cafe anymore, and I'll have to go to the subway or the park. But even if I fall to that point, I'm determined to survive. What am I going to do with my life? I don't know yet. But if I don't do anything, it's all over. I may never be able to return to a normal life. But I'll keep working, keep standing, keep struggling. Because I don't want it to end yet. There may be days when I have to eat at a soup kitchen or spend the night on the subway. But even so, I'll keep living. As long as I'm alive, I may encounter a tiny bit of hope. It might be a job. It might be an encounter with someone. It might be a future where I can laugh with my family. I keep moving today because I believe in just these things. That's when the man who came to the internet cafe said, "I've decided to go to Japan." I thought, what's the big deal if I go to Japan? But he said that when he looked at the job openings in Japan, there were far more than in Korea. So he said he'd go to Japan with the money he would have earned from working for a month. I think that takes a lot of courage, but he must be doing that just to get out of Korea. I was a little envious. Maybe if I went to Japan, I could get a job and live in a house. I want to live in a house. That's why I'm working today. Various opinions were received from people overseas regarding this topic, so here are some of them. It was thought that Korea was developing economically, but is that not the case? I wonder if they are okay. It's not like they are just living on the streets, but there are people who don't have homes. I hope their lives will stabilize soon. Homelessness is a problem in America too, but somehow the situation in Korea feels more realistic. It seems like no matter how hard they tried, it didn't work out. It makes me want to support them. What did you think? The number of homeless young people is increasing. The people who are supposed to be responsible for Korea's future are now afraid to look at the future. What will the future hold for Korea? We'll have to keep an eye on the future. Please let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video. Video.